The gods' wood at Winterfell had a silence that was not empty but filled. A hush thick with the smell of damp earth and iron-rich leaves, with the soft plink of water falling from one leaf to another down the broad limbs, with the far-off thud of a heel against log or frost-softened path that never seemed to cross the boundary of the place. The heart tree's red eyes watched as if a patient old thing already knew what would be asked of it. Robb stood before it with wet in the fur at his collar and a raven's message in his fist, the parchment rumpled and near-black where his fingers had pressed too long and too hard. He had read it 3 times under Maester Luwin's lamplight, then taken it here because the gods' wood had been his father's habit, and because the scent of leaf and cold stone and the whisper of the stream made him feel less like a boy and more like the man he was supposed to be. Gray wind moved in the shadows behind him, a gray ghost gliding from trunk to trunk, his eyes catching red for a heartbeat as he turned. Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Hand of the King, charged with treason and taken into custody by order of Joffrey Baratheon, the first of his name. Robb whispered, the words as foul as the backwash of an old cistern. Treason. The City Watch, commanded by Lord Slint, have seen to the king's justice. The Lannisters keep the peace. The words had the polished sheen of men who hoped to choke you with civility. Robb closed his eyes and saw candlelight on his father's face, the line of his mouth when the talk went grim, the steadiness of his hands as he cleaned his sword after practicing with Bran in the yard. He saw Sansa's shining eagerness to be loved by a city that would not love her, heard Arya's thin laughter as she fled outriders and obligations and Syrio Farrell's wooden sword clacking on stone. He saw his mother's hands, raw from travel, holding him when he had been small and fevered. Take care. Maester Luwin had said it in the quiet voice he used when offering simple news that would split the floorboards. The River Lords will call for aid soon. If it is war, you must have friends on the way to the Trident. The Tullus, the phrase, perhaps the Vale. The Vale, Robb had said, and Luwin's mouth had dipped as if an unseen hook tugged it down. Your lady mother is with her sister. It is possible the Lady Lisa may be difficult. Gray wind came to his flank and pushed a cold nose into his knuckles until Robb put his other hand to the thick ruff behind the wolf's ears. The wolf's breath steamed. The heart tree watched. The world narrowed to a point of decision, and in that narrowed place Robb found not the old counsel about patience, not the memory of his father's long silences when a matter could not be hurried, but something else that was partly rage and partly duty and partly the awful clarity of knowing there would be no one who could make this choice for him. He knew the Riverlands were already bleeding. Gregor Clegane had ridden, and fires were walking the grain fields. Tywin Lannister would be on the march soon if he was not already. The Tully fish would be gasping in low, hot water pulled by the gills. It would be sense, good northern sense honed by centuries of winters, to move first to guard his mother's kin and secure the crossings. He could imagine his father's voice saying just that, not with reproach but with that steady weight that made men stand up straighter. But in his father's voice he also heard the words not said aloud. Guard your blood. Robb opened his eyes. The heart tree bled red down the veins of its face. You taught me the way of winter, he told it. His breath came white. But I am not winter. I am the sun you raised to stand when the standing is hard. Gray wind flicked an ear, listening to leaves, or men beyond the leaves. Robb turned. 2 men had come to the edge of the Godwood's hush and halted there with respectful discomfort. Maester Luwin had his chain in both hands, twisting it once, releasing, twisting again. The other was Theon Greyjoy in a cloak too fine for his grins, and a dagger hung at an angle that made it more ornament than weapon. Well? Theon asked, eyes bright with a pleasure he didn't trouble to hide. Do we let Lannister piss in our snow until the thaw? Or do we go get your father back? Luwin flinched at Theon's crudeness, a small, habitual twitch, and looked at Robb. The lords wait in the hall. You must. I know, Robb said. His voice came out hoarse, but when he swallowed, the hoarseness eased the way thirst does when you finally set your mouth to the rim of a cup. Tell them, we ride south, not west, not to the Twins or the Red Fork. The King's Road. The King's Road. Luwin's eyes widened, and behind the surprise there was a swift, counting look as if he were already summing stores, distances, weather, the pace of boots on road, the time it would take to strip the granaries and fill wagons. To King's Landing, to my father. Grey Wind's low sound had something like a scent in it. Theon threw his head back and laughed. 7 hells, there's a song in that. The Wolf King. I'm not a king, Robb said, and the edge in his voice was steel enough to slice the air. I am my father's son, and I will have him home. The hall at Winterfell had 100 voices, and one cold at its center that the fires could not warm. Men had come with banners bundled in the backs of their wagons, and unrolled them now so the painted cloths drank the firelight. A merman rose dripping with crimson. A flayed man gaped. The crowned elk tossed its tines. The bear stood rampant. The great John had taken up more space than any man had a right to take, and filled it with meat and story both. So the men near him leaned to the smoke of his words as if it were spiced ale. Roose Bolton's pale eyes reflected the hall in small, precise ways. A table caught hole in each pupil like a fish in ice. Galbart Glover stood with Meej Mormont, quiet and square-shouldered both. Robb took the dais. The old chair creaked under him. He did not sit. He stood because it felt wrong to lower himself while the message lay in his self like a hot iron. Men turned at the scrape of his boots. You have heard, he said. You know the matter as well as I. My father is taken. The Lannisters hold the king and hold the city, and they will find cause for whatever more offense they need. A murmur. A slap of hand to tabletop. The rattle of a cup. The Grachan's laugh cut through the noise. Offense? We've a few offenses of our own to offer them, he bellowed. Take me south and I'll show Cersei's pups how the Umber hunts. The Riverlands burn, Lord Umber, Roose Bolton said, cool as a knife laid across a fevered brow. His voice was soft. Men had to lean to hear it, and then they found themselves listening more closely than they meant. May I assume Riverrun will forgive our neglect while we march past and leave their people to cook in their own houses? They'll forgive our carts of grain when we bring Ned Stark to them. Theon called from a farther board. Earning a round of laughter, he bobbed through like a gull. Meej Mormont's chin lifted. Riverrun has steel. King's Landing has stone. If we slide our axes around stone, we may feel strong in our arms, but the stone will not move. Robb let the words come, like cold air into warm lungs. Let them bite. Luwin had taught him numbers, measures, the pacing of men, and the truths that don't care for songs. His father had taught him what honor meant and how it often came wrapped in pain. Grey Wind had taught him when to bare teeth and when to let silence carry. We have no good choices, Robb said. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Men turned to listen because of what sat in his words. We have only a choice. If we go west and south to the Red Fork, we shore up the River Lords and pay the phrase for crossing. We fight the men Tywin Lannister means us to fight. He will be ready. He will chew us bloody if we do what he expects. Meanwhile, my father's head will stand on a spike. There were shouts then, narrower and angrier. Never! And over my corpse! And the great John slammed a meaty hand to his own brow as if to rip his hair out by the root. Roose Bolton's eyes did not move at all. Luwin looked down, and the chain around his neck seemed to weigh more. If we go south on the King's Road, Robb went on, we break the thing open. The Lannisters are not massed there. They will have outriders, thieves, wolves of their own to harry us, yes. But the road is ours to take, for as far as we can run. The neck we hold. The Crannogmen will keep our flanks if we march light and fast. We aim not for sieges, but for speed. We make for the city, for the Blackwater, for the Red Hill and the walls that have seen kings kneel and rise. We do not throw our bodies against the stone. We use what men we are to pry doors. From a dark corner someone jeered, "You preach magic." But his voice was small, and none took it up. "Robb Stark speaks sense for a boy," Roose Bolton said at last, and it was both compliment and sting. "If King's Landing were wheat, it would be the head of the field. If we cut it, the stalks will dry. But the scythe must cross all manner of ground to get there, and dull besides. We will be harried, we will lose men to disease and to the sun, and we may come at last to a wall that will not fall. Then what, Lord Stark? Then we have done what duty put before us. Robb said. He had not meant to say it so naked. The words hurt him as they came out. Then we have looked for our father where he is, and not where it is gentler to fight. There will be no song if I do otherwise. Silence, and then the scrape of the Gretchen's chair as he stood. I have been as south as a bear ought to go, he said. But I'll go farther for this. I'll try my teeth on King's Landing. One by one, men threw in. Some with a shout and bang of cup, some with a simple nod. Lewin's eyes closed once and opened. He looked as if, for one breath, he let himself be old. They sent the ravens that night. The wind came cold from the east, smelling of water and leaf rot, and the birds went into it like thoughts, vanishing. They rode at dawn 2 days later. Winterfell's yard made its sounds. The clink of mail being settled, the grind of leather pulled tight, the hooves in mud. But over all of it the wolves sang, a long tearing cry that stood Robb's hair up along his nape. It was not just gray wind. Shapes moved along the curve of wall and the lip of the god's wood, gray and white and darker shadowing shadows, and their voices braided together until they were not many but one. Bran watched from the steps, Rickon from the balustrade above him, his small fists white on wet stone. "Write," Bran said fiercely. "Write me what you see." "I will," Robb said, and then went down to put his arms around them both and smell their hair one last time. He felt the hard bone of the truth that this could be the last time. He did not let it show on his face. Catelyn found them at Moat Cailin. The sky was the color of old pewter, low enough to pull at with your fingertips. The fortress rose like a broken jaw from the wet ground, its towers old stumps and its walls staved in by 1,000 quiet years. Wind made a wet silk sound crossing the causeway. Robb saw a figure on the tower stump and did not trust what he saw until he was close enough to make out the shape of his mother's shoulders. He dismounted too soon, his legs unsteady, and walked the last dozen paces because that was how his father would have done it. She looked at him with eyes that had seen more roads in a handful of months than any lady ought to see in her life. Her cloak was damp. Her hair was braided tight in the way of girls and travelers. For a long breath she did not move at all. Then she breathed out and her mouth softened and he was 10 again, running to her with a scraped knee. "You look like him," she murmured into his hair. Her hands were fierce at his back. Too much like him right this minute. He had expected counsel to bite. He had expected Lisa's words to come with her, poison wrapped in silk, and a list of what any clever lord would do. Instead, Catelyn held him a long time and then pushed him back and held his face in both hands and studied him as if he were a letter she knew had a hidden line she must find. "Tell me," she said, and he did. He told her the plan, and she listened with a stillness that had nothing to do with being moved or unmoved. It was the stillness of a woman who had learned that words move the world and had no use for any wasted. "You will need boats on the Trident," she said. "At least enough to carry raiders across where the road touches the river, to seize a bridgehead. The Tullus can send men and barges, but they will be hard-pressed. If you will not go to them first, you must send men like arrows and trust my father's hall remains yours. The Freys will make you pay to set foot on their stones." "I will not go to the Freys," Robb said, and Grey Wind lifted his head as if the name were a smell he disliked. "Good," Catelyn said. "There is an eastern crossing where the road runs close to the water near Lord Harroway's. Shallow enough for brave fools at low light. Sounds like the Tully blood to me." A ghost of humor neither of them felt. It rose and died in her face. "I should ride ahead." "To Riverrun?" Robb said, and something in him eased. "To see grandfather. To ready barges." "To the crossroads," she said. "There are men who still remember me. And I remember the turnings. I can be the voice that makes open what would remain shut for a column with a wolf on its standards. Be swift, Robb. Don't give them the days a slow army will give." They took the neck like knives through cloth. It had always been so for the men of the north when they followed the causeways that only the crannogmen knew to keep dry. Reed men shadowed their flanks in skiffs and on foot and melted across the water when southern outriders tried to nose northward over the bogs. Robb saw one fight on a day the light came gray and low and the rain fell as if it had lost interest in reaching the ground. The crannogmen did not wrestle or roar. They simply appeared where they needed to be and did what they had come to do with spears and short bows and knives that never flashed. And then they were not there. The Lannister men sent across the water did not come back. Howland Reed is a quiet man, Catelyn had once said of the Lord of Greywater Watch. Quiet as water too. But have you ever felt water at your throat? Robb felt it now. Felt the deadly quiet that could choke a man, and sent word and thanks with meat and salt wrapped in plain cloth. They reached the inn at the crossroads under a sky scraped to blue and raw, with clouds piled like white mountains in the west. The common room was half empty, and the serving girl moved like a hare in winter, skittish and ready to vanish. Catelyn had gone ahead 2 days before with Galbart and 20 picked men. Her letter waited. Men you can trust at Lord Harroway's. Red merchants with thin mouths, but they'll sell their grandmothers if the price is right. Be wary of Lannister eyes in the thatch. Do not dawdle, my son. And beneath it a coarse map, ink bled in the damp. Robb folded the letter along the same crease his mother's hand had made. He felt as if that simple action folded the distance between them a little. Outside, gray wind lifted his muzzle and tasted the road south. Robb rubbed the wolf's ear and received a deep, brief growl that was not anger but the sound the body makes when it agrees with itself. The King's Road bent and ran like a blade into the lands that fed and feared the capital. Villages that had seen more taxmen than soldiers watched them from behind shutter slats. A boy of 12 stood barefoot at the edge of a ditch with a string of fish that looked like silver coins held on a cord. "Where you going?" he called in a voice that had not yet settled into the register it would keep. "To get my father," Robb said, and the boy nodded once, as if given the true answer he had asked for. On a dusk rubbed with gnats, riders with stags antlered on their helms came up the road with dust making capes behind them, and for a tight hour there was talk of spears and thieves and who had right of way until a man in a plain cloak rode out from the second rank and pushed back his hood. His hair was clean and black as oiled leather. He had a mouth made to smile and not much practice. "Renly Baratheon," Theon breathed in a tone near wonder, which made Robb want to kick him. The younger Baratheon prince, though he was a lord now, Lord of Storm's End and a man with a dozen banners chasing him. Reined in and set his hands light on the horn of his saddle and studied Robb the way you study a storm on the horizon that will not change course no matter what you learn about it. "We ride south to friends," Renly said at last. "You ride south to an enemy who sits on walls and has the city's purse in his lap. Then get out of my way," Robb said. Renly's men stiffened at the slight. Renly only looked past Robb to Grey Wind and back again to Robb's face and smiled that too-perfect smile, and for a sharp breath Robb wanted him to be a fool so he could hate him. But Renly said, quietly, "If you break the lions, the roses will bloom where you have stepped. I did not think the north would be the foot I needed." "I am not your foot," Robb said. "I am my father's son." Renly's smile slackened. Something tired moved beneath the polish. "I remember the north," he said. "I rode there once with my brother, when the world fit more easily around his shoulders. The cold bit my ears and none of your men said a word about it. They wore it like a weight they had chosen." He was watching Robb with an intensity that slowly bled the mockery from his face. "Bring the cold to the Red Hill," he said. "If you can, I will find friends for you once the bells start. If you can't, I never met you." Renly passed like weather, and the line of men that had become a river flowed on. The road took them to the eastern bank of the Trident where it ran low in its bed. Catelyn was already there, cloaked in river dust, with a ramshackle flotilla moored under willow boughs that made the water dappled dark. "River men who like coin better than questions," she said, hand on the rope of a creaking barge, and smiled one of her small, practical smiles that had no room for pride. "You'll go over with the horse and 500 picked men. Fast, before their mothers remember they liked the Lannisters better after all." "Roose Bolton should go with the foot," Robb said. "He knows how to peel an army apart and put it back." Roose inclined his pale head. "I will secure what we take on the near shore. Send me a courier every night." If your couriers stop coming, I will assume I am now the army and I will stop moving toward a wall. The crossing was a twilight of mud, curses, and the slap of water against planks. Gray Wind hated the boats, hated them enough to shake until his teeth clicked, hated them enough to climb aboard anyway because the man who smelled like his pack stood in the center with his hand pressed flat to thin wood. They poled across as the light bled from the sky and night laid a black cloth over the water. Somewhere downstream, a heron gave that strangled cry that always sounds like a child halfway to drowning. On the far bank, in a willow stand where midges rose like smoke, Robb took the saddle again and did not sit in it but rode half-standing with his knees like hinges and his heart up in his throat. He had left the bulk of himself on the northern bank in neat ranks under Robb. Osa's narrow eyes. What he carried across was point and edge and risk. The northern horse, Great John and Karstark and Mormont, and a knot of men whose names Robb had learned in a fortnight by day and by firelight because he had made himself learn. They used the river under them like a road for the first day, hugging its curve and letting the trees hide them when they could. Twice he sent Theon with 20 good riders to run down a rumor of Lannister scouts. Twice Theon returned with a rope of ears like red leaves and a grin that did not reach whatever part of him tried very hard each night to remember how to be an honorable ward. On the second evening Catelyn came to Robb's fire and neither of them spoke for some time because there are conversations for which the only preparation is to allow silence to lay the table. "You are leading well," she said at last. "I do not say it because I am your mother. I say it because men who do not need to flatter you are following where you point your hand." "I do not like it," Robb said, and when she looked up sharply he added, "I do not like how much I like it when it works. I think of him. I think of father and the way he could walk through a yard and make men straighten their backs by the way he put his foot down. I am not him." "No," she said, "you are you. And the gods do not waste much time making men who are not themselves." She smiled then, a weariness and a beauty both. "You sleep less than you should. I know the look. I hear the city," he said, not sure why he said it, since there was no bell and no cry and no odors from Flea Bottom here under willow boughs. "In my head, I hear the gates shutting." They came in sight of the Blackwater 2 days later at first light, and Robb understood that his head had guessed what his eyes now showed him. The river ran wide and flat, metal-colored, with tar smell and tide lift and ships sitting like beetles at mooring. The city rose on its hill in layers, white of sept and red of keep and the long gray ribbon of walls with their teeth bared. There were skiffs in the water shaped like pickpockets' thumbs, and there were cogs with their sails wrapped tight as sleeping bats. He had never seen King's Landing. He had imagined it too clean and then too dirty and had settled on something between. The thing itself refused both visions and presented him with its own facts. Smoke, hunger, too many feet on too few stones, fishermen who could smell coin and fear far across water. Sound moved oddly here. Bells rang in a different part of the head than in the north, and men's cries had a higher thread in them like something being sawed. "Don't look long enough to fall in love or hate," Catelyn said in a voice so low it might have belonged to the river. "Oars catch hearts." He made the sign his father had taught him, to thank and ward both, and then pointed with his chin. "There. See that?" The river curled, and a spit of land made a half-hidden shallows, and beyond it was a narrow strand of mud between water and a low wall near the river gate. Gray Wind whined. Theon leaned forward in his saddle as if he meant to leap it and go swimming. "They have men in the towers," Catelyn said. "I can feel their eyes. If you try to run bows down that strip, you'll bring me back a cloak full of holes and a dead boy." "I won't try," Robb said. "Yet." The camp they made was not a camp so much as a shadow laid down along the bank among reeds and the low shacks of fishermen who appeared out of boats as if the boats had grown them. Robb bought silence with coin and with the promise that if anyone asked later, they had seen only river birds preening. He put men in the stands of low alder and in the sheds where nets dried. He sent Karstark east with a handful to see if the Kingsroad gate looked soft or hard, and he sent the Great John west to touch the smaller posterns, just to feel how they pushed. That afternoon a boat with a black sail moved out from the city's side of the water and cut across tidy as a knife. It had a single passenger wrapped in a plain gray cloak. Robb had seen many plain cloaks in the last weeks that covered men who would prefer not to be known. This one did not make any pretense. It carried itself like a spider that had decided to be a moth for a day. "Lord Stark," the man said when he had been brought under the broken roof of a net shed where the smell of old fish fought the smell of river mud. He bowed just enough to be courteous and not enough to be anything else. He did not throw back his hood. Robb did not ask him to. He had an answering sense that knowing too much can be worse than knowing little. "You know who I am," Robb said. He did not make it a question. "I make it my study to know many useful things," the man said. His voice had that soft, busy tenor of a man who had once been a boy in some other city, a place that smelled of cinnamon and brine and sweat, and had trained his inflections as carefully as a girl trains stitchwork. "I am a friend to all sides because I am a friend to myself. You may call me Varys." The name moved through the men behind Robb like a draught of wine that might be too strong. Theon's hand twitched toward his knife and away again. Catelyn's mouth flattened. "Your father lives," Varys said in that same careful, polished way. He might have been reciting the ingredients for a salve. "He is in the black cells. The king plays at mercy and justice by turns, and Queen Cersei plays at mother and serpent both, and when they are not playing they are being exactly those things. Lord Stark's confession would serve very well. So would his death. So would his rescue, though fewer here admit it. What do you want?" Robb asked, because all piles of words compress to that question if you step on them hard enough. "I want the realm to remain a realm and not several realms laid out like ribbons on noble necks," Varys said. "I want children to grow up with all their fingers and not have to learn to count their dead brothers and sisters before they learn their letters. I want a quiet in which I can hear what must be heard. I want balance. Balance requires weights on both pans." He smiled then, a thing like the quick movement of a fish's mouth. "Your appearance is a weight." "Thank you." Catelyn's voice had an edge of summer steel. "And you came to tell us this because you are kind?" "Kindness," Varys murmured, "is a word for fools to use on men who know the shape of power. I came because you will act, oh yes, you will, and I must adjust my other pieces when you move. I came because I can open a door a finger's width if you are clever enough to get a hand into it." "Which door?" Theon demanded. "The one in the wall of the river gate," Varys said. "At night, when the tide runs slack and the guards are bored enough to play dice in their heads. They do not play out loud. They are not fools. But they are men, which is nearly the same thing at certain hours of the night." Robb looked at his mother. The shape of a plan was not a plan. In the north you do not step onto ice because it resembles a path. You put your weight on it and feel if it will take you. He did not yet know what this ice could bear. Catelyn's eyes went to the floor and away again, and in the space of that glance Robb saw the girl she had been, curious and quick, and the woman she was, whose curiosity had been wrapped in grief and duty until it had learned to ask small, powerful questions. "How many men?" she said. 50 would be seen," Varys said without hesitation. 10 might not. 3 would not. 3, Robb repeated. He thought of Grey Wind, whose paws on stone made no more sound than shadow, and of the men he could trust to move as he moved and stop when he stopped. The needle of the plan slid into place and pricked something in him that bled resolve. "Take me to the door," Robb said. Varys's smile flickered. "I will not," he said, "but I will tell you how to find it, and I will mend any torn net the fishermen complain of in the morning and assure them it was mended all along. If you are caught, I will weep." "Do you weep?" Catelyn asked, so dryly even Theon's mouth lifted for a moment. "On command," Varys said. Robb sent for Jon Umber and exchanged him for Jory's cousin Baron, younger and less beloved by the guard's eyes, and for a woman named Era who had followed Meege Mormont from Bear Island and moved as if the ground were trying to remember where she was while she had already learned it. He took Grey Wind because he could not take him. He left Theon, which delighted and stung Theon both. Night came on with rain that had forgotten how to be anything else. The Blackwater went from metal to slate and finally to a thickness that smelled of oil. They wrapped their feet in old cloth and old fishnets because that is how you do it when you do not want sound. They moved in the world between watch and sleep, where houses are bright islands and the spaces between are oceans. The door Varys had described was not a door until it was. It was a place where 6 stones in the wall had the slightly old look of stones that were put where they did not first belong, and the marks on them were shallow as a breath but different than the marks on the stones around them, as if the stonemason had had another thought while he was chiseling and had never told anyone. Eddard found it with her palm. Her fingers curled. The stone shifted with a little sigh, as if the city were a great creature rolling in its sleep. Inside it smelled like old water and men who had pissed where they stood for 100 years. The passage went down and then up and then down again, serpent quiet. Grey Wind's breath was warm at Robb's knee. Baron's hand brushed Robb's cloak once and then steadied. Somewhere the rain found a crack and tapped there, patient and septic. The noises of the city filtered in. Snoring and coughing and a bell rung by a boy who was trying not to fall asleep with the rope still in his hand. They came to iron. There was always iron. It took 3 breaths and a 4th, and then Eddard made a small possessive sound like a cat, and the lock obeyed her. The gate moved. They went through. They were in the city. It felt wrong to be in something so many men were preparing to take, as if he had crawled into a giant's mouth and looked at its teeth from the inside. Here, Baron whispered, pointing with 2 fingers. The black was less black in that direction, with a smear of light like rancid butter where a lantern bled against wood. The wall at their backs had the texture of barnacles. Grey Wind's hackles lifted. Footsteps. A man cleared his throat. A too loud whisper. My throw. Dice ticked on wood. Someone started humming a song mothers only sing to babies, and the men listening did not know what to do with their mouths. A pail clanked against stone, because there is always a pail that clanks at exactly the wrong moment in every city in the world. Robb put his hand on Grey Wind's scruff and felt the strength there, not as a comfort but as a law. Do not waste this. He did not let himself think of his father's face in the black cells, because he would run at the nearest wall with his head. He thought of the smallest thing he could do next, and then the next. They took the 2 guards silent and quick, the way Eddard had promised. The way Baron had learned in a yard where boys hit each other with the flats of blades until all the hitting fell away and only the knowing of where to put your foot next remained. They took the 3rd guard because men always piss in 3s, and the dice thrower called him back just as his hand reached for the iron, and Grey Wind moved like poured smoke and made a sound like the bite of frostwood, and the 3rd guard did not call at all. Then the bell, another bell, higher, stirring, began to peal from high in the sept like an impatient girl tapping her fingers on a tabletop. Robb was not fool enough to think it had anything to do with him, but it shook the air and shook his heart and made the world faster or slower. He could not tell which. Go, he breathed, not sure to which of them he was speaking. Eddard went the way water goes when it knows a way under a door. Baron went as if he had been born to ground that shifted, and Grey Wind found whatever the wolf finds when men only see stone. And Robb followed the smell of old wine and bad candles down through the belly of the wall until they were in a space like a lung. Another iron door. Another lock that had been made in pride and would yield in secret. Eddard's lips were pale. Her fingers did not shake. Robb put his ear to the iron and heard the breath of the city there, the endless breathing that makes a place alive, and beyond it he heard something else. A place where breathing was slower, and a bed was a stone shelf, and a man remembered 100 walks on 100 mornings and stood up in his mind to warm himself with them. When the lock gave, it did not make the sound he feared. It sighed like Varys had said it would. Robb put his hands to the iron the way he had put them to the heart tree and pushed. The smell came first, a thick, sweet rot that clung to the tongue like a lie. The corridor beyond was squeezed and old. On its left and right, doors sat like mouths shut tight by pain. The candle Baron held made a ring of amber as tender as water around them, and in that ring iron, stone, and something like a man's patience stood together and did not break. Here, Eddard whispered, her head cocked. She moved down 3 doors and put her palm against the iron. Here, it opened to a chain sound. Robb expected a ghost. He got a man. Eddard Stark was leaner in the face than the last time Robb had kissed his cheek, and his hair was clotted to itself as if it remembered rain and blood and could not separate the 2 notions. He had a wild beard, and his eyes were bright in a way that did not belong in a dungeon. When the door opened, he did not rise at once. He put a hand to the wall and then to his knee, and then he stood with the quiet, deliberate slowness of a man who has lived with pain and chosen to keep living. "Father," Robb said, and the word had so much in it he did not recognize the voice as his. Ned Stark did not smile, because his face was not made for that. Something deeper than a smile opened in him instead and made the place seem less like a hole in the ground. He took one step and stopped because Grey Wind was there, and wolves are the truest things to keep a man in the world he knows. The wolf made a sound that was almost soft and pressed his head, hard, into Ned Stark's thigh, and Ned put both hands in the rough fur and leaned for a breath as if drawing up strength from a well. "You grew up," he said to Robb very gently, as if the words themselves were breakable, as if they could bear no sudden movement. "All at once. You taught me how," Robb said. "Then you remember I taught you how to be quiet when quiet is required, and quick when quick will serve you." Ned Stark's hand closed on Robb's shoulder. "Quick now." They moved like three men carrying a very fragile thing down the passage and through the lung of the city and up the serpent stairs. Twice they froze for the slow dance of a lantern's glow cast by a guard bored enough to walk like a man who has forgotten he is a man and not a piece of the wall. Once Era flattened her body and pressed herself into stone so thoroughly it seemed indecent. Once Baron wiped his knife very fast and did not look at what he had wiped it on, and Robb did not ask him to. When they reached the narrow place near the river gate, the tide had shifted its weight. The smell went sour. The men at the dice had stopped playing because they had fallen asleep with the dice in their hands, the way men only do when they know with a dangerous surety that nothing will happen. Era drew a breath to laugh, and the laugh came out as a sound like a sob that bounced once off the stones and was gone. They slipped through the door in the wall into a night that had swelled around the city like a bruise. Robb did not feel the rain now. He felt only the nearness of what they had done and the weight of what it would cost them when morning put a number on it. Caitlin stood in the lee of the net shed with her face scrubbed of anything but the truth. When Ned stepped into the circle of her lantern, she did not cry out. Her hand went to her mouth because it had to hold something inside that would have rushed out too loud. Then those fingers went down and she reached for him and he came to her and she set her forehead to his and exhaled like a woman who had been under water a very long time. Theon for once made no jest. Even Roose Bolton's eyes warmed a fraction, as if a light had been held near the ice and something below it had wavered. Men who had followed a boy stood a little taller in the dark and did not speak because the silence spoke. After, when they had wrapped Ned in a cloak that did not smell of the black cells and set him by a brazier with a cup of weak wine that steamed against his beard and put meat in his hand that he could tear without asking where it had come from, the bells began in earnest, all of them, not a boy with rope but men with mallets and measured hands. They called the city to itself. They called soldiers to arms. They called secrets into daylight. Varys's boat drew away without making sound, though the water stroked its sides as if hungry for noise. He did not look back. "We cannot stay," Robb said, and Ned Stark nodded as if he had been there at the council where the young man and Robb had argued with the old sadness in him and had come to this answer together. "Your sister," Ned said. "Sansa is still inside those walls. Arya as well, if she is not hiding under some table." "Arya was under a table last I saw," Caitlin said, the ghost of the smallest smile touching her mouth and going away as if it had been called back. "Varys says he cannot find her in any hand that counts silver. He has looked everywhere a man like him looks. She is not in the cells. He cannot send her, he says. She will have found a hole and learned its name," Ned said. "She will survive until we can trade for her." He set the meat down and put both hands around the warmth of the cup as if the heat itself were a thing he needed to hold. "Sansa, I will not leave her," Robb said, and then, because there is a difference between loving and leading that only becomes clear when you have to say it out loud. "But I will not lose the rest of us to stay for her. We go now. We carry what we can carry. We vanish up the river like smoke." The bells pounded on. The city's walls had a voice now. An awakening voice, irritated and full of routines it meant to fulfill. Trumpets answered the bells. Voices called in the language of long habit, to arms, to posts, to gates, to the places where you stand when you are about to be afraid. The night, which had been soft and damp and full of secrets, grew hard edges and teeth. They moved. Boats took them over like thieves moving secrets in their robes. Men clung and did not cough because coughing would wake a sleeping giant. Gray Wind sat with his ears forward and his eyes narrowed against the rain, and once he put his muzzle in Ned Stark's lap as if to make sure the shape of the man was real and that the scent would be there when he needed it later. On the northern bank, Roose Bolton had run his men like the tides, forward and back, to make the army look larger in the dark when torches lit their edges. He now coiled them up fast as rope. When Catelyn set her feet on mud again, she was already giving orders and receiving them in the same breath, making something like order out of men who ate. Ad slept 2 hours and already would have killed for a cup of anything hot. They moved like a school of fish turns, all at once without knowing how each man knew. They left nothing but churned mud and a few risky whispers in the old boats. At dawn, when King's Landing searched its banks and found prints like a story it did not like reading, the wolves had already gone. Far upriver, where willows trailed their fingers and the rain thinned to a mist that beaded on hair and leather, they made a small camp and did not call it a camp. Robb did not sleep. He sat by Ned and watched the man drink and eat and do those simple things men do to prove they are alive. He watched the sky lose its bruising and turn to the color of river water under thin cloud. "You were a fool," Ned said. His voice had all its steadiness. He said it the way you tell a boy he has come in with his boots covered in stinking muck. "You were a fool to come to the city with 10 and a wolf." Robb nodded once. "I had to be." Ned's mouth moved. "You did." They looked at each other like men who have both been pierced and are counting the rings of the wound. A heron stepped into the shallows and stepped out again, in no hurry at all, as if it knew it would outlive kings. "Now we must decide how to be fools next," Catelyn said, settling her cloak around her shoulders and its wet weight around her bones. "Do we race for the neck and let the city call us cowards, and let them think of us as a story that came and went? Or do we spend ourselves taking wagons of grain from every mill between here and Duskendale to feed a siege we cannot afford?" "We broke the thing open," Roose Bolton observed, his voice in the mist like a knife laid across a jugular. "Tywin Lannister will come now where he did not intend to come. He will come hunting his pride. A man in that mood will bleed some where he did not intend to. It is always useful to watch such a man bleed." Ned drank. He stared past the reeds into a place men cannot see when they have not been pulled down into it for a time. "We go north," he said. "We take the river lords who wish to ride and we go north. We bring the fight to ground that will not betray us with its own laws. We pull the lions into long grass and bad roads." "Sansa," Robb began, and stopped when Ned lifted a hand in a motion that was the same motion Robb had seen his whole life when the lesson mattered and his mouth was about to run ahead of it. "We cannot break our necks on those walls to bring her out," Ned said, and the words took a piece from him as he said them. "We will trade. We will show the small council that they would rather a market than a massacre. There are still men there who want to believe that all of this is a ledger and not a graveyard." "Stannis," Catelyn said softly, "and perhaps Renly, if Renly can be made to believe in anything that does not have green silk sewn to it." "Stannis," Ned confirmed. He looked at Robb. "You moved quick because you had to. Now you must not. Now you must let the quickness fall off you like breath in winter, and you must be cold." Robb thought of the heart tree, of its inexplicable red. He thought of the bells. He thought of the hands that had opened iron for him in the dark, hands that could open other things for other men, and of the way the city smelled, and of the way Grey Wind had leaned into his father as if the wolf had known this was a thing his man would need to feel. "I can be cold," he said, and felt what it cost in the saying. A quiet, private coin handed over. They dismantled the camp when it was barely a camp and moved upriver in a column that avoided the road as often as it used it. Messages went like fish darting under the water, blinking silver when they needed to be seen, hiding when they did not. Lord Harroway's men looked at the water a long time and then pretended to notice only swans. Duskendale put up shutters with an elaborate display of disinterest that showed how interested they were. Further north, in fields where the wheat still stood high because the men of the Trident had no mouths for it just now, peasant boys ran along the edges of the column until their mothers pulled them away by the ears. The Lannisters had the city, and the city had its bells, and its bells had no more to tell the north for a time. The ravens would carry the story in any case, that a wolf had gone into the Red Hill and pulled out the head lion's prize by the jaw. It would be a brave telling, and then it would be an angry one, and then it would be a careful one. Robb knew the shape of stories because he had grown up in a place where cold required men to remember the right ones to survive the winter. They reached the forks of the Trident where the waters called to each other in different voices, and their men of the riverlands came out from hedgerow and copse, blinking, hungry, armed with pikes so old that the rust on them had a genealogy. They looked at Ned Stark and some of them cried without meaning to. They looked at Robb Stark and found their mouths had nothing to say for a minute or two until the great John bellowed something about pies and whores and decent beer, and they laughed and could be men again. Edmure Tully's letter, when it reached them at last, was blotted where a wine cup had clearly fallen, and funny in places that did not mean to be funny, and full of love because he had loved Catelyn when she was a girl and loved her children because he could not help it. He wanted a war that would make him feel young, and to be congratulated for wanting it. He sent men and asked for more, and promised that Riverrun would be strong because Hoster still breathed and could be made to sit in a chair and put his hand to a table and bark once or twice each day to let the Riverlords know the old trout still had his mouth's iron. They were rivers now, the North and the Trident, twisting together fast because time and the Lannisters pushed them into each other. Robb tried to remember each man's name and face until the names and faces crowded like fish in a net, and he could only hold the feel of them, the weight of their hope and anger and what they had chosen to make of him. Ned's presence steadied them in ways he could not yet gauge. Men who had come for the son saw the father and discovered they had come for both. The tents, when they pitched them, had sounds inside them at night that were not like the sounds inside tents a week earlier. Men sleeping softer, a kind of grace. When a scout returned reporting Lannister outriders burnt out of a village 2 days to their west, the men went about sharpening and oiling with a diligence that was not frenzy, but practice. Roose Bolton came to Robb's fire one night when the moon sat on the water like a coin too melted to spend. He stood just at the line where the fire's light stopped being light and started being suggestion. He set his gloved hands behind his back. He looked like a man at prayer in a new, ugly religion. "You did a thing," he said, and the faintest surprise touched the word "you." Now everything is different. Robb felt the weight of that without letting it push his shoulders down. "The city will come for us," he said. "The lions will come. All of them. They will come," Roose agreed. "They will come to the river, where the road is a convenience, where we can make it an inconvenience, where wooden shoes trip a man on polished stone." His lips turned. "We will be cold, as your father says," he murmured. "Cold and patient. We will let the river do our work, and it will not ask a song for payment." Robb thought of Sansa in the Red Keep, her hair brushed flat by hands that told her it would be all right if she did exactly as they asked and never forgot that they asked it. He thought of Arya in some hole with a loaf stolen and her knees up under her chin, eyes bright and mouth dirty, making a list in her head and saying it every night before sleep. He thought of the two of them like lights at either end of a corridor that had doors he could not open yet. He thought of the doors he could. "Send men to break the golden tooth," he said. "Not to hold it, to break it and leave so they know it can be broken. Send men to every mill we can reach and burn the mills and take the grain and don't leave them anything the Lannisters can eat. Send men to every road and tear up stones and roll them somewhere else." Roose listened. When he bowed, it was not deep, but it was a bow. It was the first time he had bowed that Robb could remember. It rained that night and the night after. Ned Stark walked in the rain as if reminding it what kind of man he was. When men stopped him to ask for his word, he gave it, and it was a word like a peg hammered into new ground. A place to tie something to. He spoke with his son in a voice that was neither command nor advice, but a kind of simple talk that says the time for ritual had burned away in a black cell and what was left would do. The river rose and messages came like fish. Tywin moving east. Jaime recalled to the city with sharp words pinned to his orders. The sharp words perhaps peeled off and left in a tent where no one read them. The gold cloaks had swung hammers at the river gate that night and found nothing but scrape marks on old stone and a missing watchman whose name none of his fellows would say out loud. Varys did not send another man. He did not need to. Catelyn gathered the river lords like a woman herding cats with milk and threats both. She rode more than she slept and slept with her boots on sometimes because she did not want to be the lady who was always putting her boots on when men came asking for her hand for some fresh knot. When she came back to the camp, her face was clean and wet with river mist, and her eyes had 2 new lines at the corners that would not go away. She set her hands on Ned's shoulders and breathed in as if the scent of his skin, washed of the black cell's wax and stale wine, were a thing a body could live on better than meat. "Riverrun will hold," she said. "Edmure has made oaths on the old stones. Hoster speaks every morning to the hall and bleeds a little every day to the leeches because he is determined not to die until it would be inconvenient." Ned's mouth twisted. "He would not forgive himself if he did not manage both," he said. Robb looked at them both, and for the first time a thought that had come only as a shadow now put on flesh. He could not be the boy who was their son and the lord the North needed and the knife the Trident needed and the ransom that would save Sansa all at once. He would have to let the boy fall away the way a tree lets bark slip when it grows. He could take pieces of the boy with him, his father's hand on his hair as he bent to kiss his brow before a ride, his mother's fingers easing a thorn from his palm, but the weight of him would have to be new weight now. The thought did not frighten him. It did not comfort him either. Simply was. The way water is. They moved the camp again, farther upriver, and not in one move but in many, the way a school of fish turns from 10 small movements rather than one great decision. The scouts came back with tales of men in crimson moving in dust, of banners the color of unsalted butter with green roses on them at Renly's back as he played Lord in the Stormlands and Highgarden both, of men in black ships from Dragonstone who did nothing and everything at once by their stubborn watching, of a red priest seen on a hill at dusk with his hands out like a man measuring a coffin. In the quiet between all the movement, Robb sat with his father as the man cleaned a sword he had not been allowed to hold for weeks. The blade lay across his knees. Oil was bright and dark by turns on it. Ned's hands moved in the old economy that Robb had always loved. The exact amounts, the no-wasted gesture, the patience that felt like prayer and had nothing to do with God's. "There will be a price," Ned said after a time. He was not looking at Robb. He was looking at the sword. "There is always a price for anything that moves the world. You have put your hand on it and moved it." "I know," Robb said. "No," Ned said. "You think you know. I do not say that to wound you. I say it because I am your father and because the price may come in the coin you least expect. It may come in the lives of men you did not know you loved until the moment you must give them away. It may come in the way you learn that the boys who ride with you grew into men while you were looking elsewhere. It may come in an old man's breath failing. It may come in the death of a wolf." Robb looked up sharply. Grey Wind lay nearby with his head stretched on his paws, his eyes following a fly with the lazy menace of a lord watching a man he means to hang eventually. "No," Robb said, and then bit the word in half. "It may," Ned said, and went on oiling the sword. "I do not say it will. I say you must be ready to spend it. If you are not, someone else will spend it for you, and you will discover only then what it cost." Robb wanted to be angry and could not because the anger was a smaller thing than the truth. He reached out and laid his hand on Grey Wind's ruff. The wolf lifted his head into it without opening his eyes. The fur was thick and coarse and warm. It had Ivy's stubbornness under the hand. Robb felt, through that contact, something like a long rope pulling taut, something that ran from the wolf into him and then out into the water and then out beyond the river and away. It was not a comfort and it was not a fear. It was a fact. At mid-morning, a courier in the plain livery of the crown came riding down the river road with a white cloth tied to his spear shaft. He was terrified and proud and young. They let him come to the outer line of pickets because you let the enemy deliver you his message. You never take it from his hand with a knife in his belly because then you have to guess what the words were supposed to be. The message wanted to be a clean parchment with a courteous hand on it. It had been rewritten 6 times. It offered mercy for treason. It offered clemency for rebellion. It threatened law for the breaking of law. It asked for a talk. It was a city talking like a lord who knows he should not have to speak to a woodsman about logs and snow and yet finds himself doing it, and hating the necessity. Robb read it. He did not laugh. He did not spit. He folded it and put it in his belt. "What will you give them?" Caitlin asked, when the messenger had been fed and sent on. "Reasons to want more talks," Robb said. He spoke slowly, choosing the words like tools. "The more they want to speak, the less they'll want to march." "We will march," Roose said softly, off to one side. "But so will they." Ned looked at his son and saw the man there the way you see the line of a ship in a half-built hull, in a certain tilt of the beam, in a shadow that promises a future shape. He put his hand to Robb's shoulder. It was not a blessing and it was not approval. It was the old, plain gesture of a father making sure a knot is tight. They would move again at dusk, to take a ridge road that looked down on the ford where Lannister men liked to water their horses because the trees there were pleasant and the flies were fewer. They would let the river and the flies and the trees be their friends. They would take the men they could take and leave the rest for later because you cannot take everything in one hand, no matter how you stretch your fingers. Robb tightened his cinch while the light changed and the day stepped toward evening, sure-footed as a cat. He looked once toward the south. He imagined he saw the red hill and the walls and a girl combing her hair with slow strokes with a brush someone else had chosen for her. He imagined he saw a smaller girl under a table counting to herself in a whisper, and a man with eyes like summer rain who had not been born with a sword in his hand but had learned to carry one because honor is a weight you pick up each morning and sleep with each night. Gray wind bumped his hip, impatient for the road. Robb set his hand to the wolf's skull. He felt the old connection thrumming again, the rope between two bodies, the river's voice, the way the east wind tastes. He drew breath. He let the boy go as much as he could bear. He put his boot to the stirrup. He put his weight down. He moved because the world had already begun to move around him, and because if you do not walk when the ground sets itself under your feet, the ground will decide to go on without you. The horn blew once, not loud. Men stood. The camp that was not a camp fell apart into a road that was not a road. They passed under willows that had learned the names of 1,000 soldiers and would one day forget them. And over the sound of the river and the shush of leaves came a laugh from the Great John and a curse from Theon and the low, calculating murmur of Roose Bolton to the captain beside him, and the steady, small sound of Ned Stark's breath, each exhale almost an oath. Behind them the city remembered its bells and rang them as if sound alone could undo what had been done. In front of them, fields lay with their backs in the sun and their faces turned up to watch whatever would happen next. The sky held its weather in the way of a woman holding a letter she is not sure she wishes to read. The horses picked up their feet. They moved north and east, and all along the river men who had thought themselves alone heard in the distance the sound of a host flowing like water over stone and knew that winter had chosen its road. They made their first stand before noon the next day, not because a man had planned that exact stretch of bank, but because the river and the road had conspired to offer it up. A ford shoaled there under a fringe of alder. The King's Road bent to pass close. A rise with scrub on its brow gave a good place for bows and for the watching of men. Robb sat his horse in the shallow water until his boots were wet through to the ankle and let gray wind wade ahead as if the wolf had been born to this business of testing. The current pressed his calves and thought about taking him. It did not. On the far side, reeds leaned as if listening. "The water will take them if they're impatient," Brynden Tully said, having come in the night like a blade slipped under a collar. The blackfish wore no ornament beyond the trout on his cloak-pin and the knowledge about him like a mail shirt. "If they're careful, we'll take them while they are being careful." "Let them be careful," Robb said. He could feel how tension made a man want to spend it, as if it were coin burning through a pouch. He made himself hold. "We make our care look like clumsiness. We stumble. We retreat to where we mean to fight. We let them measure our cowardice by the rope we hand them." The Great John snorted so loud 2 horses started and had to be gentled by their riders. "I'm too old to pretend to be craven," he muttered, but there was a relish in him. The kind men get when the weather turns and you can smell snow that will justify having carried firewood. Roose Bolton, dry as winter bone, added, "Then don't shout at them until it is time." Whisper your cravenness. If he smiled, it was inside his mouth. They lay the ground the way a housewife lays a table, simple and exact. Scrub cut and set to make lanes. Brush whitewashed with clay on the underside so a signal would not gleam. A fallen tree dragged to where it might be a nuisance with purpose. Caitlin rode the line once without speaking, turned, and rode it again with a question for a sergeant and a nod to a boy who had tied his horse poorly. Ned walked the ford in old boots and stood where he wowl. D have stood had he been a Lannister captain measuring his next hour. When he came back up the bank he said, "They will want to take the brow. Let them. Then take their feet out from under them." The first Lannister outriders came as dust before they came as men. The dust lifted and showed a red edge and light on mail. Robb breathed against the tightness in his chest and felt his breath find a rhythm not his own but the host's, horse, man, wolf, river, all together. Gray Wind's hackles rose a finger's width and lay down again. The riders did exactly what Brynden had said they would. Halted just where the water began to palm their horses' knees and counted what they could see. Too far back, armored men waited. Banners stirred without choosing a direction. On the rise beyond the ford a spear lifted and lowered twice. River hand-talk telling of more men to either flank. They came. The first score splashed. 3 were taken by the current for a half-dozen heartbeats and recovered, and in recovering lost the measure of their rank so they bunched where they should have spread. Bows spoke from the scrub, 2 only, to say something small and tempting, and the riders dug their heels to make a better show of being brave. It did not take much to bring men on when they had already decided what they were. Robb gave ground before he had it, step by step. He let his horse hang back, the reins slack, the boy in him visible to those who wanted to see a boy. The first Lannisters up the bank climbed into the scrub and found the lanes there meant not for their feet but for arrows that hissed and then were not there. The Blackfish's men worked their bows in the rhythm he liked in fishers and archers both. Do not fight the pull, use it. When the front ranks tried to turn to shout back at the rest, the alder branches they pushed through reached for their shoulders like old women and tugged them out of true. Now, Ned said softly, the way a father says now when a boy has learned the set of his feet and the turn of his wrist at last. Robb lifted his hand and brought it down. Men moved the things they had placed. Brush over slick clay to make steps treacherous, the fallen tree to pivot and swing, a whitewashed branch to flash the true signal for the left while the right went. The Lannister second wave, careful as priests, reached the midstream and began to wonder why the careful always die with the careless when the place is wrong. Out of the reeds on the far bank, Karstark's riders came like men who had been in the river all their lives and only now decided to be seen. The flank that had not expected to be flanked buckled. In the churn and splash and shouting, Robb felt the deep truth that all good fights are a kind of conversation. He answered what the river asked of him with horse, with bow, with a holding back when every part of him wanted to go forward. When he finally loosed the great John with the foot to crash the brow, it was not a rush but a leaning, immense, inevitable. After, the water ran red until it didn't. The men who could stand did so and counted their living as if each were a coin weighed out by a lord too fond of his own scales. The captives there were had a look to them Robb knew even among strangers. Men who had come to the river because a man in crimson had pointed and who now stood in a cold new world that made their banners look like dyed cloth and not like destiny. "Take him," Brynden said, and Robb turned to see the man the Blackfish's hand had selected. Not an heir, not a famous sword. A captain with a neat beard and eyes that looked at men. The sort who knows the taste of a map in his mouth. He wore a gold lion on his breast, but his fingers were plain. "Ser Forley Prester," the man said without prompting, as if he had already chosen what he would say in this moment to keep as much of himself as he could. He offered up the name like a token. Men sometimes did when they wanted to show they were not wood to be burned. "I am cousin to none who would matter to you." "Everyone matters to someone," Caitlin said, having come forward while the talk went on, and the flicker of surprise in Ser Forley's face was almost a smile at the wrong time. "You will sit near our fire. You will tell us who sent you and how many wagons follow. If you do not lie, you will see the river again as a free man." Forley Prester measured her and Robb both with an economy he did not bother to hide. "You don't kill captives," he said. "You're not the goat men. I'll talk. I won't guess. I'll keep my word." It had the stale taste of a half-honesty. A man telling himself what would see him home. They found in his saddlebags a letter penned in a steady, legal hand and co-signed by Sir Adam Marbrand that placed Tywin Lannister 2 hard days to the west and moving east whether he wished to or not, because the lion's nose had caught the scent of his own wounded pride and could not keep from following. It asked for the ford to be held if it could be held and yielded if it must be yielded, and the neatness of the phrase told Robb more than the length of a clumsy paragraph could have done. "Let him yield the ford," Roose murmured with the letter in his hand. "Let him take comfort in obeying a letter. Let him think we mean to hold a strip of water. Then let us be somewhere else." They pulled back by noon, leaving behind rakes of brush and the impression of a wasted chance. Before dusk, peasant boys were daring each other to stand where the great John had stood and shout down the river. By full dark, the Lannisters had eased forward like house cats testing a door newly unlatched. The ford belonged to no one, which is to say it belonged to those who knew enough to use and abandon it in the same hour. At Riverrun, Catelyn set foot in the hall she had run through as a girl and found that it had become a slower, heavier place. Hoster Tully sat like an old root in a carved chair and had to stand twice before he could truly be said to be standing. He still smelled of river and leech and iron when she kissed his brow. Edmure embraced her with a fierce relief that embellished itself into boasting before he had done speaking. How he had sent men here and made a speech there and named this man to that. Brynden made him roll the map out again and put his forefinger where his mouth had put his pride. "Here," the Blackfish said. "Not there." His finger moved, precise. "Robb needs boatmen more than he needs poetry. I'll give him both if I can." "He has you," Catelyn said, and Brynden's mouth softened at that, as if she had handed him back a thing he claimed not to miss. They stood later at a tower window that looked east and saw stormlight gather and break over the Red Fork, and in the pause between distant thunder Catelyn heard her father say, very low, "I have lived too long." It was not complaint and not a request. It was the kind of truth old men say when talking to a daughter in a quiet house. "Too long to see my girl ride roads that ought to have been closed. Too long to see Lannister gold run like piss downhill and stain everything. I will sit in this chair until my back has learned it, and make the Riverlords remember what they are. Then I'll go." "Not yet," Catelyn said, a hand on his shoulder. "Not yet." In King's Landing, the bells pealed again, not for news but because men needed to do something with their hands. Sansa stood in a solar full of a light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere and did not warm. A woman's hand dragged a brush through her hair, long strokes that had nothing to do with tenderness and everything to do with the pretense of it. Queen Cersei watched without watching, a bit of parchment between her fingers. Joffrey sprawled like a boy who had been told he is a king in a voice that he heard and did not understand. "Your father," Cersei said, rolling the parchment as one might roll a sprig of mint between finger and thumb to bruise it to smell, "has made trouble." Sansa swallowed. She had learned that in this place a swallow could be heard. She lifted her chin half the width of a fingernail because that was the exact amount that seemed to pass for grace here. "If he is found," Joffrey said with relish, "I will make him kneel before me in chains and beg me to take his head. I will not do it, mother. I will refuse his request and keep him in a cage on the wall to remind the North what happens." Cersei's smile was a taut thing, like a seam pulled nearly to tearing. "You will do what is prudent," she said. "For now you will bid the girl write a letter." She flicked her eyes to Sansa and then back. "A letter to her brother, reminding him of the love she has for her sweet prince, asking him to come to court to make amends." "It is not my brother," Sansa said before she could stop the words. The quiet after them rang like a struck plate. "He is Lord Robb. He is my lord." The brush paused in her hair. The woman wielding it had the trained blankness of servants who wished to be invisible and for a breath failed at it. Joffrey's face pinched, then gleamed. "You see? Wolves are rude." Cersei's hand did not move. One could imagine a snake warming itself in her chest for a moment and not see her breathe any faster. "Right," she said, "and right as I say." She waited until Sansa had dipped pen and shaken the excess. Then she spoke the words that would go north like a bird with its wings clipped. Pleading and promise mingled in the practiced way of people who know which notes make men docile. Sansa wrote, and in the writing measured the small ways she could disobey, where to put a comma, which word to choose when two would do. She wondered if her mother would see. She wondered if her father were truly alive. She wished to be the girl who had thought the city was made of golden songs and decent men, and could not remember now how that had ever felt. Varys bowed himself out afterward, leaving behind a sadness as airy and scented as the craft he had brought to the room. Littlefinger remained a heartbeat longer than he needed to and looked at Sansa with the mild, instructive interest of a man considering a purchase he could not yet make. When the door had shut and the hush grew oppressive, Sandor Clegane said roughly from the doorway, "You did not cry." Sansa did not look up. She had learned about men whose kindness came by accident. "I have cried," she said. "I am not a well." "Don't be," the hound grunted. "Wells are for drawing from." Arya slept that night in a niche that stank of old straw and stale beer, her head wrapped in a rag that had seen the heads of 5 boys and 2 girls before hers. Yoren woke her by stepping on her foot because he woke boys that way. "Hair," he growled, and handed her a knife that had been an honest knife used for honest rope and would now have to be used for something else. She cut and felt each small sound the blade made as a tiny treachery. She looked at her hair on the floor and decided it was dead, and then decided she did not care. Yoren watched with the approval he gave to no one and nothing, and then spat. "Names?" he demanded. She had said them every night. She said them now. Joffrey, Cersei, Island Payne, Meryn Trant. And then she swallowed a name that had crept in because it had been nearby on another night. The night when an old man had lifted a sword and shown a girl what being brave looked like even when the world turned its back on you. "The Hound," she ended anyway, stubborn. "I'm not the Hound," Yoren said. "I'm the man who's going to take you out of a city if breath don't fail or steel don't find my belly first. Keep your mouth shut. Keep your eyes open. Don't love anything that can be lost between here and a farm gate. You're airy now. You piss standing up." She slept the next night with the sound of carts in her ears, as if the city itself had decided to put all its noise on wheels and trundle away. When they went with dung sellers and dog boys and trolls of the city who had learned years ago how to be walked past without being seen. She looked back once and saw the red hill, and whispered the names again, adding none and subtracting none. She was not good at sums, but she could hold those numbers. On Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon's mouth was a straight line men could have laid a rule against. Davos Seaworth stood at an angle respectful enough to show which of them was lord and which had salt under his nails. The Red Woman stood with the peculiar patience of a person who has learned how to let others' silence serve her. "Ned Stark," Stannis said flatly, "is not the man to crawl through a sewer, but the boy was. Robb Stark. The North has more steel than sense sometimes." He did not say this with contempt. He said it as a man says, "There is a reef there and I have hit it before." "Send the letters," he added. "They're gone," Davos said. 2 days ago. Every rookery from the Reach to the Neck will have ravens with heavy bellies, if the gods care for law." He shifted, eyeing the Red Woman with his apology already being prepared for the day he would have to offer it. "You put your name to them. That will count more than men think." "Names are just banners spelled with ink," Stannis said. "But I will have the right flag in the right wind. If Stark has any wits worth the breath his father spent on him, he will hold, he will not proclaim. He will let the truth do our crowing." Melisandre watched the red coals in the brazier as if the coals' slow breathing told her something personal. "I have seen a wolf in a city of red stone," she said softly. "I have seen a door that opened to a hand it should not have. Fire is not gentle with those who make play with it." Stannis's jaw tightened. "I make no play," he said. "Light 100 fires if you like. Don't waste my kindling on visions that tell me wolves are wolves." He flicked his eyes to Davos. "Keep the ships at anchor. If the lions send their fleet out, let them. We will count them when they return and see if they learned the right numbers." Renly Baratheon broke bread at Bitterbridge with Marjorie Tyrell, and found the bread as soft as the bed and the bed as soft as the looks Loras Tyrell gave him when they were alone. The letter that came with the news of Ned Stark's escape tickled him. He laughed when he did not mean to laugh, and then did not laugh when Marjorie smiled for him. "The North," he mused. "You cannot buy it. You cannot marry it. It will not bend without cracking. It is a chair I cannot sit in. So I shall sit in the chairs I can." He kissed his new bride's fingers and smelled rose oil and the good clean sweat of riders who bedded with the covers thrown back. "When the wolves pull the lion off his horse," he told Loras later with a grin he did not feel, "I'll be there to offer my own saddle." "You always mean to be the man with the horse," Loras murmured into his shoulder. "Try to be the man whose horse is already there when the song starts." Back on the rivers, Robb let the men tell the story of the ford because men must tell stories to balance the numbers written by the dead. He let it spread the way fire spreads in dry grass and did not stifle it with corrections. He went on to the next bend and the next rise. He sent the Blackfish with 30 to make the Golden Tooth's roads disagreeable to carts. He sent Mormont's women and boys who could move in the dark to pull pin and wedge from wheel and brace, to salt grain and leave barrels with their hoops subtly loosened so that they would fail 6 miles later. Not now. He sent ravens that said only, "Talk." The reply came in a hand too neat to be a soldier's. It wore the seal of the hand that had been broken and then refashioned from gold for some other man to wear. The words said that the king desired peace like a thirsty man desires water. They said treason must be answered with justice. They said the girl Sansa was well treated and safe. They said a council could be called on neutral ground if the rebels would lay down swords and trust the king's word. The letter smelled faintly of myrrh. The way King's Landing found a way to smell like commerce even in talk of war. Catelyn read it. Ned read it. Robb read it twice and then laid it on the table and let the lamps smoke above it until the seals softened, as if the letter itself were a patient liar who might confess given time. "What they want," Ned said, "is us choosing their words for them. The moment we set foot on ground they name, they own the shape of the talk." "Then we name the ground," Robb said. "Send back that we will speak at Seaguard. The Mallisters have no love for Lannister gold, and their walls will keep the small council from deciding the meeting is a market day for knives. Ask for the king's uncle. Kevin is not a fool. Ask for him and not for men who make oaths into pretty garlands to hang on drinkers' necks." Catelyn's eyes warmed a fraction. "You were listening when men thought you weren't." "I was always listening," Robb said. "I didn't always know which parts mattered." At dusk, a man in a plain cloak came with a satchel of wax-stained letters and the tired look of someone who had learned to walk and write at the same time. "From Dragonstone," he said, wiping rain from his lips with a knuckle. "From Lord Stannis. He writes like a man who does not like ink." They read the thing by firelight with the river moving restlessly beyond the canvas. It named, in a language more legal than lordly, the bastardy that had been whispered in corridors and murmured in Godswoods. It put it blunt and without ornament. The king was no king, the queen had laid with her brother, the children were false. It did not offer honey. It did not ask. It declared. Names signed beneath it in smaller letters. Men of Dragonstone, of Storm's End, sent east by Raven long ago and now called back. The stylus scratch of a smuggler whose hand had not quite learned how nobles hold quill. A priest's neat flow. "Send it north," Robb said. "Let our lords choose what to do with it and let them do it aloud. Write Stannis that we will not name a king on the back of a letter in a rainstorm. Write him that we will listen to the truth he sends us and watch what the truth does to men we fight and men we might someday have to call friend." Roose Bolton's mouth moved. "Careful and yet not so careful that you can be accused of being craven. Your father taught you a good trick." "My father taught me not to be a fool twice in the same way," Robb said. Roose's pale eyes slid. If there was approval, it was invisible. A day later, as mist lifted and the light held the water in its hand, a line of wagons with lions painted big as doors along their sides came into a meadow as if it had been promised to them. They came without outriders because their outriders had learned something at the ford the day before and decided that men on foot with nets in Alder might be river ghosts best left alone. They came with clerks who had listed every bolt of cloth and sack of oats and coil of rope and alphabetized them in minds as tidy as pantry shelves. They did not expect their lists to be untied by a wolf. Gray Wind went first into the wheat, and the wheat made a sound under his belly like men murmuring. Then the boys from the bargelands rose up out of that wheat like men returning from graves no one had known they were in. They had hooks to catch wheel spokes, and their hooks did not shine because the blackfish had smeared them with ash and tallow. The first wagon tilted, surprised. The second tilted reluctantly. The sound of sacks shifting is the sound of a decision being remade from the inside. A driver swore and then bit off his oath because he had seen the river before and knew how many words it could swallow. Meej Mormont's women ca. Me from nowhere and everywhere at once with knives in their hands and hair braided back to say this is work. The oath Robb had given Caitlin about not wasting life for a single wagon was in his mouth, and so he kept the fight small and particular, and by the time a distant trumpet began to blow unconvincingly, no one was where yesterday's map said they should have been. When it was done, 3 wagons burned from wheels up, deliberate and clean, and 2 rolled toward the river behind oxen whose handlers had decided that their loyalty cost more than they had been paid. The lions on the wagon's sides wrinkled and blackened and turned to greasy flakes of paint. A clerk stood with his mouth open and his quill hand behind his back as if he had been caught making a rude gesture in a September "You will be hanged," he said to no one in particular. Perhaps, the blackfish told him gently, the river will get around to it. It is patient. They ate bread that night made with flour taken from the wagon's innards and found it tasted like any bread. Robb lay with his cloak over him and watched the canvas tremble, and thought of Sansa's letter when he went with it to the fire. He had not read it when he first received it. He had set it aside because the weight of the seal told him the shape of the words inside and because he was embracing coldness as his father had told him to. Now he warmed the wax enough to pull it without tearing. He read the careful hand that had once laughed when it made curlicues in a girl's practice book. He read the diction of a queen sewn into a daughter's sentences. He felt the blade of it slide between 2 parts of him and then pause. "Answer," Caitlin asked from the other side of the flame, where she had been the whole time, because she was his mother and had learned to be the exact distance away a boy needs when the writing is hard. "I will," he said. He did not trust himself to say more and say it quiet enough. Later he wrote in his own hand, which had lately grown a rigid beauty that did not belong to boys, and he wrote to the Queen Regent and to the Council and to Sansa. He offered exchanges that looked fair to men who needed to be seen as fair. 10 captives, a lord for a lady, a noble lady for an innocent one. He offered to parley at Seaguard and to bring small numbers. He offered to write not a proclamation but a set of facts that could be turned, one day, into proclamations. He did not offer anything that would bring men into courtyards where archers watched. To Sansa he wrote 6 lines that did not mention love because love in letters could be held up in a hall and thrown back. He wrote, "I have father. He lives. I will not bring him back to die for a promise. You will endure. I will endure. We are Starks." And he wrote his name in a way that would make the hand who read it see their father's mouth for a heartbeat. The raven took the note in its throat like a silver coin in a poor man's pocket and went up into a night without moon. Ned stood by Robb after and said nothing. The fire made his face young and old by turns. By week's end Roos's foot had unstitched twice as much of the Lannister road as one would have thought it was possible to unpick with so few fingers. Scouts brought back news of a mailed fist feeling for purchase where there was none. There were signs in ditches, limbs of men and horses both, 1 good boot on a dead foot, a scattering of lentils out of a sack, that showed how chance did its own quiet work alongside plan. Robb sent men to the Golden Tooth not to drape banners from it, but to throw stones from its crown down into the road where iron-shod wheels would find them when the slope made breaking necessary. He sent men to the mills with coins and knives both so that the millers could choose the payment they preferred. He let villages keep the grain that would have been taken from them by lions, but made them move it to cellars stupid enough to be overlooked and too dry to grow mold. He discovered that being loved in small ways in many places buys you the time you need to do larger things. Under an oak that had been in that field before Aegon had dreamed anything, Ned sat with the Great John and Harry and Karstark and the Blackfish and talked about killing as if they were planning a harvest. Harrian's eyes had a light in them Robb did not like and did not try to name, in case naming it gave it more power than it had. He thought of Karstark's sons alive in his camp and made a note in the ledger he kept in his head. Do not spend them foolishly. Do not throw their father any meat that will teach him to enjoy a flavor he should not. A rider with a fox badge came out of trees south of the river at an hour when men were sleepy and less brave. He wore his courage down to the leather. "Lord," he said to Robb, rolling from his saddle before his horse had fully stopped. "Lannister banners at the Strawberry Ridge. 2,000, maybe more. Scouts to the east. A man in gilded plate whose horse is shod with silver. We took the measure of their march by the movement of their dust. It's not for us now. They'll test the ford and be gone." "Then we will not be at the ford," Robb said, and all at once plans ordered themselves around the plainness of that. He looked to the Blackfish and got the small nod that meant the old man saw the same map in his head. They were gone within the hour, tents folded and fires drowned and latrines covered. The river took their footprints as if it had been waiting to be asked. They moved not to where yesterday's Robb might have gone, but to where a man who expected Robb to go where he had gone would not think to look. They climbed a narrow ridge that forced horse and man into a file so precise the great John swore like a man with too many sons and not enough food to quiet them. They lay down in a line of thorn with the stems pricking and the smell of green bitterness in their mouths and waited for the sound of men who had counted on water to be where they wished it. The lion banners dipped in and out of view. The man in gilded plate had a plume too long for utility and would have looked foolish if the horse under him had not been perfect. Robb had never hated men merely for looking like something a song would hang a chorus on. He found now that he could dislike them very much as targets. He held the men until the last horse in the second column had passed the patch of thorn where gray wind lay flattened, as if he had decided to be a rug. When he lifted his hand and dropped it, the first volley went as if the scrub itself had decided to spit iron. The gilded man leaned into his horse and made the one choice he had: forward. He was not a coward. He was only a man in love with the straight line. The memory of the ford's carefulness betrayed him. Men behind him crowded, men in front of him faltered, and in the space such crowding and faltering make, a wolf found a calf's hamstrung leg and took it. The column concertinaed. The road did what roads do when men fail to respect their edges. It commanded them, and they obeyed badly. They did not massacre. Ned's eyes had been on Robb's face, and Robb had already decided the lesson today would not be body count but humiliation. They stole banners and spears and 2 trumpets. They took 3 men whose boots had cost too much and made them sit with Ser Forlay to teach him the new rules. They loosed the rest like fish one size too small and watched them whip water with their tails as they went. At night, with the men chewing meat too fast because men always chew too fast when they have not bled for it that day, Theon leaned in the darkness on the riverbank and threw stones as if the splash at the end of a throw were a thing he could control. Robb came and stood near and said nothing. A moment later Theon said, "I wrote to my father." Robb had known as much without knowing it. "What did you tell him?" "That the North rides. That his ward is not a boy who keeps wolves as pets. That there is fame to be had in the breaking of lions." Theon's laugh was a small, sharp thing. "I told him what a son is meant to tell a father who pretends to be stone and is only old wood." Robb thought of Pike's black rocks and of Balon Greyjoy's face in the memory of men who had seen him nearer than he had. "He will not come because you ask him. He will come because there is a wind and because men on islands hear it more plainly," Theon said, and in that moment sounded not like a boy who boasted but like a man who was trying very hard to sound like something else. "Or he will not come at all. Either way, he will not be still." "Stillness is not the gift we need from the Iron Islands," Robb said. He did not say what else they did not need. Theon's stone fell into the river and did not echo. News reached them, by a shepherd's son with straw in his hair and a frog in his pocket, that a man with hair like yellow hay and a voice like a sick goat had been seen near Harrenhal with a company of sellswords whose speech jumped like lice. The Blackfish's mouth thinned. "Brave companions," he said, and the words were not praise. "Let them into your house and you will never get the smell out. They'll put torches under your rafters and call it light." "Then we do not let them in," Robb said. He tucked the name into the place where he kept things that would matter later, lit by a small steady lamp. They parleyed on a stony bit of shore where the river bunched up to get through. The Lannister envoy was not Kevin. Men like him do not go where arrows can drop from an alder for the price of a cough, but a half-uncle of a cousin of the Red Lion line, trim and brisk and full of the right greetings. He wore his crimson as if it did not show blood, and he had never thought about whether it did. "The king," he began. "The Queen Regent," Robb corrected politely. Catelyn stood with him. Ned did not, because there are times when a thing is best kept as rumor. Roose hovered behind like a cold thought a man cannot shake. Ser Forley watched from a pace away with an interest he did not bother to conceal. "The king," the envoy repeated, voice sharpening, "and the Queen Regent desire an end to insult. Your father." "My father is Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North," Robb said. "He is under my protection where your king's protection failed. Speak of offers, not of desires. Desire is what a boy learns to master the first time he is told no." The envoy's mouth whitened. "The girl Sansa is in our care." "Our care would have been better," Catelyn said with such evenness the man flinched. "Had you consulted us before making yourselves her keepers. The king offers mercy if you lay down arms," the envoy said in a rush that sounded like a drowning man choosing one direction. "He offers clemency if you return his hand." "Your king has no hand," Ned Stark said, stepping forward into the light then because it had to be done now or rumor would rot into doubt. He moved like a man who had been sick and was fine with men seeing that he had been sick because it was the truth. He had a plain cloak on his shoulders and the eyes of half an army in his head. He had a man who held a token. He broke the man and made the token dirty. There is no hand in King's Landing. The envoy blanched in the quick, unattractive way of men surprised into honesty. He recovered at once and glared as if this were a play in which he had not been told his cue. "You are a traitor," he said thinly. "I am a father," Ned said, "and a man who knows what oaths mean. Tell your queen," Robb added, "that when she has a better bargain, she may send it with a man who will not call a mother's care insult, and who knows the difference between a crown and a hat. Tell her we will not come to Seaguard unarmed. Tell her we will come with the truth Stannis has given the world, and we will set it on the table and watch who dares pick it up." The envoy looked at Roose then, which was instructive. Roose looked at no one. After a time, the envoy bowed himself into his horse. He could not bow out of it. Horses have long memories for men who do not know how to be men. At Riverrun the leeches had done their morning work. Hoster Tully's color was better and his temper worse, which pleased his maester and his daughter equally. Edmure fidgeted through a council and then rode out to throw javelins into the river because men must sometimes do a useless thing loudly to find themselves again. Brynden took the far tower and watched the plumes of smoke that had begun appearing like a string of gray beads along the western horizon and made an invisible decision that cut 3 knots in his mind. Word came from the neck that reedmen had led a column of gold cloaks into a bog by telling them it was a road that sometimes slept and sometimes woke, and that by noon the road had shown its true character as a piece of deep history that did not care whether men breathed. A captain who had laughed at the frog spears in Crannig hands wept to see his mailed horse drown without thrashing. A raven with a green ribbon on its leg brought a sprig of Highgarden courtesy bound to a clever insult. Renly called Robb cousin and offered him pears and perfumed words and the assurance that when the time came for men to remember who was generous, he would be remembered. Catelyn read it and made a face a miller's wife might make at grain gone weevilled. "He will not choose until the coin has already landed," she said. "But then he will place his foot on it quick and swear it was always his." "Write him," Ned said. "Thank him for his kindly fruits. Tell him we have fish. Tell him we will send him a cartload if his tables seem empty in a month." In the nights between road and river, Robb dreamed of Winterfell's godswood and of the heart tree bleeding its color into the world. He dreamed of the red Keep's Hill and of a door in a wall that did not look like a door until a woman's hand found its face and pushed. He dreamed of Arya under a table counting and of Sansa sitting straight-backed while false words were sifted into her mouth like flour and not choking. He woke once with his heart in his throat and Grey Wind's head already there, pressing down as if to push the thing back into its cage. By the time the moon had waxed and thinned again, Tywin Lannister had discovered that a river has more minds than a column of men, and that gold does not weigh enough to sink a well-laid log jam. He came within a morning's march of Robb on a day when rain made all iron sullen. Then he found the ford empty, the ridge scraped of men. The meadow which had seemed to welcome his wagons turned into a trick that taught wheels how to hate. He sent out his best to find a stand-up fight and got for his pains a dozen small, annoying, calculated pains. He began to wish to lay his hands on the throat of the boy who made ruses into a habit. That wish became its own lever. When the next parley was proposed, it was from the city, not from the field. It came with a seal unbroken and a tone too reasonable for anyone's liking. The Queen Regent would exchange ladies. She would send Sansa to Riverrun under escort of reputable knights of houses that had never once knelt to a stag or a wolf, only to roses and to commerce. In return, she would expect his lordship Eddard Stark to be returned to the capital to make confession before the gods and the people, after which the king, out of his dear love for the North, would grant his mercy and send the old wolf to take the black, where he would do no more mischief. There was room in the phrasing for a dozen knives. "Do not step close enough to see how sharp they are," Ned said, laying the letter down with a hand that did not tremble. "She will not truly exchange our daughter for me. She will plan to have both by day's end and think herself clever for it." "She thinks herself clever for breathing," Catelyn murmured. The lines at the corner of her eyes had deepened. "We will not give you," she said, and her voice had in it a piece of Winterfell no rain had ever touched. "We will not trade you and sit waiting for the raven that says the thing we let happen has happened." She looked at Robb. "We will take another coin to market." "Letters," Robb said. "Stannis's truth for our daughter. We send her to Seaguard. We let the Mallisters do the weighing, with Bryndon's eyes on their scales. We send the king a choice written so plainly even a boy can understand it. We write to Storm's End and to Highgarden both. We say, 'Come to the river where the truth floats, and see whether your hands itch for it.'" They did not send the letter that day. They let it sit on the table under a stone until the next morning's light changed what it looked like. Because Catelyn had taught Robb that words altered themselves in the dark, and a fresh eye ought to be put on any road you mean to walk twice. In the night, he went to the river by himself and stood ankle-deep until the cold bit him hard enough that he remembered every line of his body. Grey Wind went out to his belly and came back, shaking, unembarrassed by his nature. When Robb turned to go, he saw his father under the oak, looking like a man who had argued long with himself and was resigned to being beaten by truth, not by any other hand. "You will be hard," Ned said, not unkind. "Not as a boast, as a tool. When you can soften, do so. Do not be seduced by it." "I know." "No," Ned said again. "But you will." He put a hand on Robb's cheek, the way he had when Robb had been a fevered child, and the warmth of it went through the boy's skin into the places a man keeps standing because an older man once told him to. "We will wait for Arya on the road," he said quietly. "She is not in their hands. No letter will fetch her. She will come of herself or not at all." Robb nodded, grief moving through him like the part of the river that runs under what you can see. He would send men. He would look in every ditch and under every hedge between the city and the neck. He would admit this to no one but his own chest, that the not knowing weighed as much as iron on his ribs. By mid-morning, a boy with straw in his hair and a frog in his pocket came to the edge of the camp with a message bound in red silk and looked important until the silk was untied, and then he sagged back into being a boy. The same legal hand spoke. A ship would come to Duskendale with a lady aboard. The Queen Regent did not trust the Mallisters. She would trust the Darklands' old walls to keep bad luck out and good manners in. The escort would be small as befit peace. There were notes in the margins that smelled of Littlefinger and of a trap laid with wit and then disguised as someone else's wit. "Duskendale," Brynden said, thoughtful. He put 2 fingertips to the map and walked them. "It is not the worst place they could have named." He looked at Robb. "You are not going to Duskendale." "No," Robb said. "I will," Ned said. "No," Caitlin said in the same moment, not loud, and the two words together were like the iron when Era had coaxed it. First a protest, then a sigh. I will, Ned said again, with no weight added and yet with all the weight that ever can be added by a man who knows the shape of what he is offering. With 15 and the blackfish. We will not be taken in a hall with curtains. We will choose the yard. We will choose the wind. We will touch the girl with eyes before any man touches her with hands. If it is false, we will burn the ship at anchor. Robb's mouth was dry. She is not coin, he said. We do not drop her into the sea to see if she floats. We will not, Ned said. We will stand on the shore and learn whether the water keeps its word. He looked at Caitlin. You know the shape of this better than anyone alive.
Yo.
You would go yourself if I let you. Caitlin's hands were steady by force. I would go, she said. You will go and come back. She did not make it a question. The next days broke like thin plates and were stacked one on the other. Robb rode with the host and set them where they would be hard to find and easy to make into a fist if a fist were needed. Gray Wind trotted with his tongue out and his eyes narrowed against dust and doubt. Ravens lifted and vanished with ink in their bellies. On a windy noon that snapped banners like laundry, a rider came with a piece of true news for once. A black ship had been seen off Duskendale's quay at dawn, its prow like a crow's beak, its oars set like ribs. Men in good mail guarded the gangway. A girl stood on deck with a back straight as any spear. Robb did not know whether to bless or curse the truth for being the truth. He turned the host's face toward a place where their weight would mean something if the day soured, and then he let the men he could not be go where he could not go. Ned took 15. The blackfish took 20 more, as if to prove that numbers are a language he could add to as he pleased. They rowed hard and they rowed quiet. When they were gone, the camp felt wrong to Robb, as if a wall that had always been there had been lifted out to let an invisible thing through. He watched the sun climb and refused to count his breaths. He made himself walk, to talk to men whose hands fumbled with harness because of what they wanted not to think about. He made himself put his hand on Gray Wind's skull and take the comfort the wolf gave, because there will be days later when no comfort is available and taking it now is not a sin. He looked north and then did the harder thing and looked south. The river made its usual sounds, unconcerned. Evening came lazily, the way it does when a river valley has worked all day. Light lay on the water like skin on milk. There were flies, because there are always flies at the hour when hope starts to taste like meat. A horn blew far off in the trees and someone swore at a mule, and Robb realized he was smiling because the foolishness of that swearing meant that nothing else had gone wrong yet. He held the smile down with his teeth. They came back at full dark, not as a blaze of torches but as shapes that became men because men expect to see men. The first rider into the pool of firelight was Brynden. The second was Ned. Between them, on a horse that did not like the crowd and did not pretend to, sat a girl with hair coiled tight and a mouth that would have trembled if she had let it. Sansa slid from the saddle without grace and caught herself on the stirrup and turned it into grace by standing straighter after. For a heartbeat she looked younger than the last time Robb had seen her. For the next heartbeat she looked older, and he did not know which hurt him more. He went to her and did not touch her until she moved first. When she put both hands to his sleeves, he put his arms around her and felt the hard little bones at the base of her neck and had to remember to breathe. Gray Wind came and sniffed her cloak and huffed and stood guard with his body between her and the fire, which is to say between her and the world. Caitlin took her daughter's face between both palms and kissed one cheek as if anointing it and then the other. She did not cry. Sansa did not cry because she had cut all her tears out and fed them to the queen for supper over a long fortnight. Ned put his hand to Sansa's hair and she turned into it like a plant bending toward light. Brynden sat and drank and told the story later with so few words that men leaned and felt the gaps fill with their own breath. Duskendale had been a place trying to remember what it had meant to stand against kings and failing. The men who met the Stark party had been dressed properly and had known too much about propriety to trust it. There had been archers in the lofts, of course, and blades in sleeves, of course, and Sansa had stood like her mother at 15 and said, in a voice that was not loud, "If a man touches me before I see my father's face, I will drive my teeth through my own tongue and drown in my blood on your steps." It had been a useless threat and a brave one and a true one. A man who had looked as if he wished to be somewhere else ever since he got to the quay had made a small, dismissive gesture at that exact moment that saved 3 lives, and Brynden had silently honored that man's desire to live to be old and play with the grandchildren of whoever finally married him. They had gone to the yard as Ned insisted. They had counted men and counted avenues and named the wind. Then they had done the thing that would not make a song and would save a life. They had traded a secret for a life. Sansa had been under a cloak and on a horse before the paper that documented the thing had cooled. Behind, Duskendale's walls had stood wondering whether they had just made themselves heroes or fools, which is to say, men. Sansa ate bread and meat without fish this time and did not taste either. She slept by Catelyn with her head on her mother's arm, as she had when she had been newly tall and had wanted to be taller. Ned lay by the fire and woke 3 times in the night to listen to his daughter's breath and turned his face back toward the flame each time with the same careful slowness, as if not to frighten anything away. Robb slept not at all and felt the way's exhaustion stains a mind. He rose with the river and took the news that came at dawn like a man takes a familiar beating. Tywin had shifted east again. A hedge of thorns had cost him 50 men and no ground. A small lordling in Lannister Red had died at a ford no one had ever cared about before. The Gold Cloaks had killed a man they had said was Varys's cousin, and the rumor had gone through the city like a fever that makes men generous and cruel in dizzy turns. Arya had not been seen. Arya had been seen on the Mudgate. Arya had already escaped on a galley. Arya had stolen a pie and had been chased by a cook with arms like hams and had vanished under a wagon. Each story disagreed, and Robb folded them all the way he had folded his mother's letter on the first day. Along the creases stories tend to make because men like certain shapes. At mid-morning, when the sun chose the patch of river to glitter on like a lord choosing which child to praise, a rider came with a banner of white and red. Tully colors inverted as a courtesy and a jest both. Seagard would host whoever would come to swear by truth. Patrek Mallister's hand sign neat and strong. The Queen Regent sent a softer hand with flourishes. She promised not to bring a host. She promised to send a chaperone for the talk that would make old women of good houses feel better about the world. She promised. Send a promise back, Catelyn said. Send 3. Wrap them in steel. Send the Blackfish ahead, Robb said. With 20 who look like 10 and a tongue that can make a gate understand why it should be open at the right moment and shut at the wrong. Send me, Ned said, and the way he said it made the men near them stop the little tasks they had been doing with their hands because they had been doing them to keep from listening. I will look a man in the eye and know whether the story he has come to tell will kill my children. I will not go alone. I will stand where a wall meets water. If he lies, he will do it while I am counting how his hands move. Robb looked at his father and at his mother and at the river that had taken them south and was now prepared to carry them wherever they were stubborn enough to point themselves. He found cold in him where hot had been. He let it fill the shape Ned had asked him to hold. Go, he said. Come back. Ned put his hand on Robb's shoulder one last time, not as lord to heir or as commander to subordinate, but as the man who had taught him how to stand when the standing was hard, putting the last lesson on the pile. Stand and let others go where you cannot. The camp breathed in. The camp breathed out. Far away, someone sang a line of a song with no tune and no words anyone would ever write down. Gray Wind lifted his head and stared toward the north as if he could see beyond the river's next bend and the next. The smell of the day changed, just as it always does in the last hour before noon. The host moved like a school of fish again, together, apart, together. Robb felt the rope between the wolf and the man in him hum, felt the old tree in Winterfell bleed its color into new leaves in his mind, felt the bells of kings landing in his bones and the hush of Seagard's walls in the back of his throat and the counting of a girl under a table in a city he had never seen. He did the only thing a man in that moment can do. He began the work of the next hour. He sent men on horses with messages in their mouths and messages in their pockets. He took bread and broke it in half and ate it standing. He breathed. The river went on saying what rivers say to men who will not listen and men who cannot stop. That everything moves whether you choose to move it or not, that stone remembers, that cold is a kind of mercy when you are burning, that the north is not a place on a map but a way of carrying yourself from one bank to the other. The day wore itself like a shirt it had mended twice at the elbows. The sky held its weather. The wolves, close and far, sang once and then were silent, the way men are before something happens that will be remembered.